So have you ever really stopped to wonder why people commit crimes? What actually makes someone cross that line? Is it just poverty? A series of bad choices? Or could it be something, deeper? Something woven into the very fabric of our society? Well, sociology doesn't really give us one easy answer. Instead, it throws us into this fascinating debate with a bunch of competing theories, and each one gives us a totally unique way to look at the problem.
So, here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we're going to start with a pretty wild idea, that society might actually need crime to survive. Then, we'll dive into a more down-to-earth debate about what really causes crime. And finally, we're going to flip the whole thing on its head and challenge what it even means to be a criminal in the first place.
Okay, first up is what's called the functionalist perspective, and it kicks off with a truly mind-bending idea. What if crime isn't a flaw in the system? What if it's actually a necessary part of it?
This radical thought comes from one of the founding fathers of sociology, Emil Durkheim. His argument was that crime isn't some kind of social disease that we need to wipe out. No, he saw it as a totally normal, inevitable, and get this, even a necessary part of any healthy society.
Now, the key to understanding Durkheim's whole idea is this one concept, anime. Just imagine society as like a game, but the rulebook has suddenly gotten all blurry and confusing. That state of confusion, where people just aren't sure what's right or wrong anymore, that's anime. And when that happens, crime becomes a lot more likely.
So, how on earth can crime be a good thing? Well, Durkheim pointed to three positive functions. First, there's boundary maintenance. When someone gets punished for a crime, it's like society drawing a thick red line for everyone else, saying, "See this? Don't cross it." Second, it can trigger social change. Sometimes you need so-called functional rebels to break an unjust law to show everyone that the law itself needs to change. And third, there's social cohesion. A really terrible crime can actually bring a whole community together, united in their shared sense of outrage.
And the real strength of Durkheim's theory is that it just completely reframes the whole conversation. He was the first person to really look for a positive side to crime, and more importantly, he shifted the focus away from just blaming individuals and their bad choices and pointed instead to the bigger social picture. In doing that, he really highlights how things like our upbringing and how we're socialized are tied to crime.
But let's be real, the theory has some pretty huge holes. I mean, for starters, crime is absolutely not functional for the victims, right? The theory also never really explains what's the right amount of crime, a little, a lot. And finally, by focusing so much on these big social forces, it kind of brushes over the fact that people do make their own choices.
So, taking Durkheim's ideas and running with them, another sociologist, Robert Merton, adapted them for modern America. And he asked this incredibly powerful question. Our society tells everyone to go chase the American dream. Get rich, be successful. But what happens when the system is set up so that not everyone actually gets a fair shot at it?
Merton's strain theory lays this out as a kind of chain reaction. Step 1. Society sets this big goal for everyone. Usually it's about wealth. Step 2. It tells us the right way to get there. Work hard, play by the rules. But here's the problem. Step 3. Inequality means that path is blocked for a whole lot of people. And that creates this immense pressure, this strain, which can push people toward crime as, a different way to get to that same goal.
And this is what makes Merton's theory so powerful. It brilliantly explains how law-abiding people and criminals might actually be chasing the exact same dream, they're just using different methods. And you know what? The statistics seem to back this up. Most crime is about property, and it tends to happen more in places where there are fewer legitimate opportunities. But like any theory, it's got some serious blind spots. It doesn't really have a good explanation for white-collar crime. I mean, wealthy people aren't feeling that same kind of strain. It also focuses almost entirely on individuals, not group crime like gangs. And it has a tough time explaining crimes that aren't about money, like vandalism just for the sake of it. All right, let's switch gears completely. We're moving on to what are called the realist theories. These guys aren't so interested in the grand purpose of crime. They want to know what's causing it on our streets right now and what we can do about it. And they're basically split into two opposing camps. And here's the fundamental split. On one side, you have the left realists. They argue that crime is often a rational response to social injustice, things like poverty, inequality, and being pushed to the margins of society. On the other side, right realists fire back and say no, crime is a result of a breakdown in social control. It comes from things like poor parenting and individual moral failings.
So if we dig into left's realism, we hit this key idea called relative deprivation. Now, this isn't just about being poor. It's about feeling poor and unfairly left out, especially when you're bombarded with images of wealth all the time. The theory goes that when people feel this way and they see no legitimate way out, they might form their own subcultures where crime is seen as a perfectly valid way to get what they feel they've been denied.
What's great about this theory is that it really shines a spotlight on the real-world harm caused by poverty and inequality, and it takes the victims of street crime seriously. But the big question it can't quite answer is this. Most people who experience deprivation don't turn to crime, so why do some and not others? It also tends to ignore crimes committed by the rich and powerful.
Now, right realism flips this whole thing on its head. It puts the blame squarely on the individual and their family. You have thinkers like Charles Murray who argue that there's this underclass that just fails to teach their kids right from wrong. And then, taking it even a step further, you have Wilson and Herrnstein who make the really controversial claim that some people might actually be biologically predisposed to crime because of things like impulsivity or even low intelligence.
Okay, let's just pause on that for a second. This idea that a low IQ could lead to crime. What's the thinking there? Well, the argument is that it might make it harder for someone to think about the long-term consequences of their actions, or to resist the immediate gratification that a crime might offer. It's a very controversial point, but it's central to their view.
You can see why this theory is popular, right? It seems to offer simple, practical solutions. But when you start to poke at it, it gets complicated. It tends to assume criminals are way more rational than they often are. And it kind of contradicts itself. Are people choosing crime freely, or is it their biology? And get this, research by Lilly and others found that IQ accounts for only about 3% of the difference in offending. Just 3%.
Okay, so we've looked at crime as maybe necessary, as a result of social problems, or as an individual failing. But for our last stop, we're going to ask something completely different. What if crime isn't really an act at all? What if a criminal is just a label that powerful people stick on the less powerful?
This is the core idea of labeling theory, and it's summed up perfectly by the sociologist Howard Becker. He said, "The deviant is one to whom that label has successfully been applied. Deviant behavior is behavior that people so label." Think about that. No act is automatically a crime. Killing someone in a war can get you a medal. Killing someone on the street can get you life in prison. The act is similar, but the label society applies changes everything.
So the theory argues that this label can actually create a self-fulfilling prophecy. Imagine this. Once someone is officially labeled a criminal, it can become their master status. It's the first thing everyone sees about them. This leads to them being rejected by mainstream society. They can't get jobs, they struggle to find a place to live. So where do they turn? To other people who have been given the same label. And this just reinforces that criminal identity, pushing them deeper into what's called a deviant career.
And this isn't just an abstract theory. You see the devastating impact in the real world. Almost half of all prisoners are reconvicting within just 1 year of being released. Labeling theory would say this isn't because they're just bad people. It's because that ex-con label follows them everywhere, making it almost impossible to get back on their feet and trapping them in this vicious cycle.
Wow. We have been on quite a journey, right? From crime as a function of society to the power of a single word. So after all that, where does it leave us? What's the real answer?
The thing is, sociology doesn't just hand you one simple answer. Instead, it gives you this powerful toolkit of different lenses. Is crime a weird but necessary gear in the social machine? Is it a predictable symptom of an unequal world? Is it a failure of personal control? Or is it just a powerful story we tell about certain people? Maybe the biggest takeaway is this. The way we choose to explain crime fundamentally shapes how we try to solve it. And that choice, well, that has consequences for every single one of us.